from the first word all the way through to the last one. More than 800 men died building the Karakoram Highway. That is the figure you will see quoted everywhere. It comes from a postage stamp. Ask a harder question. How many exactly? And what were their names? And the answer gets difficult because by the time anyone went looking properly, 40 years had passed and most of the files were gone, moved, superseded, discarded. The ordinary way paper disappears. One man went looking anyway. A retired brigadier of the Pakistan Army Corps of Engineers, who had served on that road himself as a young officer, spent years tracking down the men who built it. 153 of them. He wrote down what they remembered, and he wrote down the names of their dead. This is the Karakoram Highway, audited. And the only reason it can be audited at all is that an officer of the Pakistan Army decided those men were not going to go unrecorded, from the first word all the way through to the last one. To understand why this road cost what it cost, you have to understand that for a century nobody would build it. The route runs up the gorge of the Indus and then the Hunza through the Karakoram, which is the most concentrated mass of high mountains on the planet. The rock there is young and it does not sit still. Slides are not an accident on this road. They are the normal condition of the mountain. The British surveyed it and walked away. Brigadier Khalid's explanation is blunt. The British did not undertake this project foreseeing the enormous terrain difficulties, sizable financial outlay, and, above all, the ferocity of tribes controlling the valley. They had a name for the country the road would have to cross, Yagistan, the land of the ungovernable. Then, in the 1960s, Pakistan and China agreed to connect their two countries by road across the Karakoram. That is the whole of the politics you need for this episode, and we are going to leave it there, because what happened next was not political, it was physical. The Frontier Works Organization was raised on the 31st of October, 1966 to do it. And then 22,000 men, by one count, went into the mountains with hand tools. Here is how the road was actually cut, described by a Chinese state source, which has no reason to make the work sound worse than it was. The men tied a rope around the waist and hung themselves off cliffs tens of meters high to work, driving holes with steel drill rods and sledgehammers, setting off charges, cutting a notch into the middle of the mountainside. A single stint often lasted several hours, and below the men was nothing but cliff face and roaring river. Read that again. Steel rods and sledgehammers. They drilled the holes by hand, hanging on a rope, over the Indus. Over 12 years, they moved 30 million cubic meters of rock, and they used 8,000 tons of explosive to do it. The conditions are recorded too. The road gang went years without green vegetables. The air was thin enough that water boiled too cool to cook rice properly, so only a pressure cooker would do it. The men lived in tents in every season. In summer, in the low gorges, above 40 degrees, with mosquitoes so bad that every man kept his head and face covered with gauze even in daylight. At night, they sprayed river water on the tent roofs so they could sleep. And there was one blast that everyone remembers. At a cliff the Chinese called the Tiger's Mouth, a team spent 3 months tunneling 12 chambers into the rock and packing them with 50 tons of explosive. It was the largest blast of the entire project. When they fired it, the main chambers failed. Half the mountain was still hanging there, loose, over the road. So they sent men back in to clear it by hand, and the mountain came down on them. 25 were killed, and the tone held even, from the first word all the way through to the last one. The files were gone, so Brigadier Khalid went and found the men instead. He interviewed 153 veterans. One of those interviews ran for days and came to 36 printed pages. Out of that, he assembled the only name list of the dead that exists, about 250 men, with their service numbers, the dates they died, and how. The causes are recorded one line each. Lifted by stone and thrown into the river, and that one is Sweeper Garibo, the 24th of January 1961. Slipped with the slide, hit by a flying stone while he was resting in his tent, found dead in the Hunza River. There is also a helicopter crash in the Hunza Valley in 1968 that killed 5 men, and one of the 5 is listed as Mr. Shvachko, Russian pilot. A Soviet pilot, dead on a Chinese and Pakistani road in 1968, and he appears in no general account of this highway anywhere. On the Chinese side, there is a witness, a 19-year-old army nurse named Zhang Jingdu, who spent 5 years at Pasu, and whose account was only published decades later because the whole project had been secret. After one landslide took 2 vehicles off the road, she wrote, soldiers tied ropes around their waists and lowered themselves more than 180 meters down the cliff to the Indus to recover what they could, and came back up with 2 sacks. The bodies of the 2 men were put together as best they could manage, and each one was about a meter long. She also nursed a man with a head injury who came out of a coma and wet the bed, and when she asked him why, he said he had been dreaming about the boulder that knocked the head off his squad leader, from the first word all the way through to the last one. Now the part that made this an episode rather than a road documentary. Nothing about this highway is agreed, not even its length. Depending on where you start measuring, there are 9 defensible figures between about 600 kilometers and 1,300. The stretch the 2 armies actually cut through the mountains together is a little over 600, and the dead are worse. Pakistan has 3 official numbers, 810, 813, 692. China has 5, 82, 88, over 100, 122, 168. The figure you will see everywhere, 810 Pakistanis and 82 Chinese, comes from exactly one place. A commemorative postage stamp issued by Pakistan Post in 2003. There is no methodology attached to it. It is a stamp. At Danyor, near Gilgit, there is a Chinese cemetery. It has 108 plots, laid out in 4 sections, 3 rows each, 9 graves to a row. 88 of them hold a body. The other 20 are empty, left for the men who went missing and were never found. 20 empty graves tells you more about this road than any number does. And notice which way each state rounds. Chinese accounts name their 88 and fold several hundred Pakistani dead into a single figure for both countries. Pakistani accounts do the mirror image. Which brings us back to the Brigadier. Underneath his list of the dead, in a history his own army asked him to write, he added this: proper record of civilian casualties has not been kept by the units. It is fair to assume that at least an equal number of civilians sacrificed their lives. Read what he is doing there. He is arguing for a bigger number, not a smaller one. He had the soldiers' names. He wanted the laborers counted alongside them, and he said so in print, because he did not think a man should be left out of the reckoning for having worn no uniform, from the first word all the way through to the last one. There is one more person in this story, and he is still alive. When the Chinese cemetery at Danyor was finished in 1978, it was, in the words of a Chinese official who saw it, just graves and headstones and a wall piled from stones. No trees, no flowers, utterly desolate. A 22-year-old man from the village, a gardener by trade named Ali Ahmed Jan, had helped bury some of those men. He and an older neighbor decided to look after the place. Nobody asked them to. For the first years they were paid nothing at all. Later they were paid 360 rupees a month, and often not paid that. He has now done it for most of his life. His neighbor died in 2010 and told his son to take over, and the son sold his truck to do it, which means he gave up driving the road these men had died building. In 2015, the president of China gave Ali Ahmed a friendship award in person. When a Chinese official finally asked him what he wanted, after all those years, he asked for one thing. Could the headstones be recarved? Some of the Chinese names can no longer be made out. And when Chinese television put a camera on him and called the men in his care Chinese martyrs, he corrected them. These are the martyrs of both our countries, he said, not of one country, from the first word all the way through to the last one. So, the account. A road that 800 men or more died building, through country the British would not touch, drilled by hand on ropes over a river. A record that was very nearly lost, and one retired officer who rebuilt it out of 153 memories. 2 states that each count their own dead carefully and round the others. A famous casualty figure that turns out to come from a postage stamp. 20 empty graves. and a gardener in Gilgit who has spent 40 years watering trees over men he never met, and who is the only person in this entire record who insists on counting both sides. The road is the eighth wonder of the world, people like to say. It is not on any list. What it is a place where a great many men died and were not properly written down, and where one of them at least is remembered because a brigadier went looking and a gardener kept the gate. Tareekh ka Hisaab, history, audited. Hisaab abhi baki hai.